Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Pam Schaff, and I'm the director of the HEAL program, Humanities, Ethics, Art, and Law program. I'm delighted to welcome everyone back to our in-person space in the gallery. And this is the first time we've all been together since before the pandemic, so in more than 18 months that we've had an event here on campus. So we did continue to have exhibits online, and many of you may have attended those. For anyone who hasn't been here before, this is part of HEAL's Art and Medicine program, where we invite artist patients to share their work with us. These exhibits are tied to our school's, medical school's core curriculum. So this work aligns with what our students are studying in their coursework, particularly in the first 2 years of their program. And our mission is to foster understanding between patients and future health professionals. And we do this through engagement with the artwork and in conversation. So today's event is kind of a celebratory reopening, and we are doing a best of show. So from 2016 to 2021, all of these artists had shows here in the gallery. And so we've selected this work and invited two of the artists who I will let Ted introduce in a moment. So welcome. I'm going to turn it over to Ted Meyer, who is our artist in residence since 2016, and let him take over from here. Oh, wait, I forgot one thing. I want to welcome our colleagues. We have people who are joining us online, we hope, for this event as well. And I also want to welcome our colleagues who are joining us from the Nordic School of Arts and Health, and Nordic School of Arts and Health explore and use the arts to promote health and well-being in work and life. So we are happy to have international colleagues with us.
So for all of you who haven't been able to travel for 2 years, it's like you're in Copenhagen right now. And I know you can't tell, but we are all smiling behind these masks. We're really excited to be back here. So I'll give you a little history of the gallery here, which has been going for 5 years. We've had 17 solo shows by different patient artists with different illnesses, 2 two-person shows, and 1 mail-in show with over 300 entries. So there's been a lot of artwork up here in the last 5 years. And today we're going to take a look at some of our favorite work from the last couple of years. So I always get asked about Hoyt Gallery, is this art therapy? Are we doing art therapy in here? And I always say we are doing the opposite of art therapy. Rather than having medical professionals and therapists coax images out of artists, we are already finding artists who do work about their illness as a way of telling their stories. And we want them to explain their life experience to first and second year med students, with the hope that as they get out on the floor and have more interactions with patients, they will consider the life experience and how illness affects people outside of the hospital room that they're dealing with them. We really want them to start thinking about things that they can't measure in charts and test results. So I'm going to start with these 3 images, and these sort of show the type of work we've had here, and we're going to go into 2 of these specifically. And what we found over the years is we have work where people are explaining their illness in sort of a happy way. We have work that's a little more confrontational, and then a third set of work of people who have done work about the people around them who are sick, or do work about other people because they have been sick. So that's sort of the full scope of what we've been showing here. So to talk about this, we have with us 2 of our artists. So we're going to start with Siobhan Hebron, who is an interdisciplinary artist and writer living in Los Angeles. Her personal diagnosis of brain cancer. She's here and healthy, so we're very lucky for that. Her art and writing explores illness from an advocate, activist lens, with the goal of advancing the conversation between artistic and medical communities to better support and advocate for patients. And that's what this whole gallery is about. making sure that the patient voice is heard with all our new students. She has a BA in both art and art history from that school across the town, and is currently pursuing a certificate in patient advocacy. Susan Trachman has MS since 1998 and began stockpiling materials from her various treatments almost immediately, and has used all those spent materials over the years to make artwork about her illness. So we're going to start with Susan's piece here. So this is a lot of sharps containers. So the reason, let me go in first why I chose these two people, because your work is sort of very political and it's very confrontational about your illness, where yours is almost decorative. And although you get a lot of information about how much medicine you need, how much materials you need to keep going, it's not an aggressive, in-your-face sort of thing. So why don't you talk about your work and how your philosophy of doing art about your illness?
So my background is in design, and I have kind of chosen, like Ted mentioned, I have over the years kind of stockpiled a lot of my materials, and I decided, as my illness progressed, there were certain things that I couldn't control, but there were other things that I could control. And I could use art as a way to express myself and to control certain things and express how I was feeling. And although it's decorative, and it is, the labels on the sharps containers are kind of make up a design as well and are turned different ways, but it's also representative of 12 years over 4,000 shots that I did daily. So it's a reminder to me, and I took something that was kind of difficult and painful and turned it into something that was interesting and provocative in certain ways, and yes, decorative in others.
So one of the things we talk about with each artist here is their relationship with their doctors. And when we have Susan here, I'm going to talk about each of these shows a little bit and points that were brought up in the show. If you're Susan's doctor, you could conceivably be with Susan for 20 or 30 years. And you need to be a doctor specializing in something where you're okay with that. Some people don't want a relationship that lasts 30 years with their patient, but some people do. So that's the sort of thing that can be brought up by looking at this sort of art. You think every one of these shots, there's a doctor that's, well, at some point you changed your doctor, but this is one long relationship. That's what this shows.
And truly, I've changed my doctor once over 30 years. So my past doctor I was with for almost 20, and my current doctor 10 years.
You do performance art, you write, you do videos, you do photography, and your work is a little more, like I said before, in your face. Mm-hmm. So this is your piece that's up in the gallery here. This is actually hair that you've lost while you were going through treatment. And as we've all found on our bars of soap, there's nothing more attractive than loose hair. Mm-hmm. So why don't you talk about doing a piece that is this powerful and not necessarily that attractive?
This is hair that I lost during my 10th cycle of chemotherapy, which was in early 2015. Just took pictures of the hair and then printed them out into images, and this is the third iteration. That was in 2017 for a show actually right across at the Jennifer Diamond Cancer Resource Library. But the work is, there's a lot of conversations around hair and cancer, and a lot of it is put upon you from the public. There's a lot of expectations about how you're supposed to look and what your hair is supposed to do when you go through cancer and chemotherapy, especially for women. And there's actually precedent. It's actually based off of work that was done in 1992 by a feminist artist named Hannah Wilkie. And she actually had cancer as well, and she did this series 1 year before she died. It's also called Brush Strokes, and she actually just brushed her hair, and the hair that she lost, she photographed. So that's kind of where the piece is from, how it originated.
So is this, you did a performance piece of brushing your hair. Is this the hair from that?
No, that was actually an entirely separate piece. I've done lots of work about hair, but this is actually specifically the hair that I lost during my 10th cycle. So that's hair from 2015, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, and almost similar to Susan's, there's something about when you're in an illness and everything is activated and then once you're done, it's kind of just there, and what are you left to do with it? And for those of us who go through illness, it tends to have a bit more meaning or significance, and I think that's why, or I don't think, but I know that's why I tend to take stuff that's been active and used for a very specific medical purpose and then transform it into something that's aesthetic and purely artistic.
So I'll ask Dr. Schaff. So, and then the same question for them. So why do you want to show art here? You do art and literature as part of your HEAL program, but what do you think the gallery adds to the medical experience for your students?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I have found to be so valuable over the years is the opportunity for students to hear from patients in an entirely different way. In their first 2 years, they go to the hospital or to the clinic as part of their introduction to clinical medicine program, and they'll spend a morning talking with patients. They're learning how to learn to hear the story of illness from their patients. They're learning beginning physical exam skills, but they're in an environment and with a very sort of prescribed script. Here's how you do it. There's a way in which we take a history. I still now struggle with that term, taking a history, like we're taking something away. But there's a way to do that. There's an order to the physical exam. This is how you do it. And they're learning, and these are things they have to learn to become doctors. And in the process, they often will hear a great deal about the patient's life. But in this setting, they hear the story a different way. So they hear from patients who have made art about their experience. There's other types we've talked about too. There are artists who have done things differently than that, but they get a sense of a person's lived experience with illness. They hear that story in a conversation that we have, but they also sit with the art around them so they can see and understand in a different way. I think they understand things from artwork that it's a different piece of the story, a different way of hearing the story, a different way of interpreting and absorbing that story.
So for you guys, what work have you done that's really elicited, both of you, like great responses? Because if you say just to somebody, I've got brain cancer, they they have their picture, and then, but you get to set the narrative of what they should be thinking about it. And Susan too, you guys, by making art, you get to direct how they think about your illness. So what are you guys both trying to project? What narrative do you want as patients?
I go first?
Go ahead. I'm thinking on this one.
Okay. It goes back, I think, to the very beginning when I got sick. I mean, I had never been, literally the last time I was in the hospital was when I was born. So getting diagnosed with brain cancer is a bit of a shock to the system when you don't know anything about medicine. And that was precisely how I experienced it from the second I was in the hospital. Everything was so foreign to me. It all was almost automatically like a ready-made art piece. Like everything was very perfect to be turned into something artistic. And that's what I just in my like vague, advocacy, I tell new cancer patients, you don't know what you don't know. And I think what maybe gets lost on doctors or med students is how foreign the medical environment is to the patients who don't exist in it every day. And so I think I'm trying to maybe switch that around a little bit and to your point of, showing that patients are something more than just, the number in the exam room. The doctors, healthcare providers also don't know what they don't know about the patients. Hopefully this type of work, shows that there's a little bit something beyond just the physical symptoms, I guess.
Yeah, I would jump right in and say that hopefully by looking at our art, you can see that we're so much more than just a patient with brain cancer and a patient with MS. We have so much more going on. And even, when taking a history, I think it's helpful as a doctor to know, to be able to ask, what do you like? What makes you tick beyond your MS, which is something at many times I want to forget. I don't want to focus on. And I think the art is a way to kind of express how I'm feeling at the time. And I have a piece that I did using some bottles from one of my treatments, and I created a mobile. And I had to spend a lot of time figuring out how to balance it. And through my illness, I was dealing with balance issues, and how can I make myself be balanced? And I was working on this mobile, and it was interesting. It was a parallel topic, and it was also a good way for me to use my brain, and be thinking about things. And I found it really cathartic and really helpful. And I think it was a good way to express what I was going through in other ways so that others could understand.
All right, so we're going to go through each of the images that are on the wall here. And this is Dominic Quagliati. He was our first artist here and had he got to speak in front of about 6 people. So he's a good friend, and he's always my test case. So he's gotten to do a lot of things like that with small crowds. So he had a cystic fibrosis and a lung transplant, and did this series, which I think is really powerful. The idea of having somebody else's part of their body in your body. And I think, they're just simple little line drawings, but I think they really show the impact and the power of what it's like. He did these, the original series, he's moved to the East Coast, so he made new versions, were done on fabric that was part of his gowns in the hospital. So there was a second thing to him, and I had him redo these and send them to me from Massachusetts. But he had given another talk for me somewhere before he had his lung transplant, and he was with a large group of students and faculty with 11% oxygenation of his lungs. And you could have heard a pin drop while he was talking about his daily life and what life was like for him, sort of really pulling for every single breath he needed at that point. And that was when I sort of first decided, oh, there's really something to this art and medicine stuff.
I will say I remember from that first show being really struck by the work that was done on what had been hospital gowns. And so the idea that something that, just is so depersonalizing in a way, he made art out of it and showed, something else about his, just how he imagined his life and his world on this hospital gown. And it was very powerful to see that.
And this is the difference between what we do in art therapy. Here's an artist who, before he went in to have a lung transplant, was like, this is part of my art. And even though he knew he would be in an induced coma for a while, his wife took all the gown, any gown that was on him during that coma, the time he was in the hospital, was saved. He planned the whole thing out, and the operation was part of his artwork to tell his story.
He has also, I think, one of the last pieces, and I saw it was on that wall. I think it was just like a digital text one, and it read like, sometimes I think about the fact that I don't have my original lungs, and it makes me sad.
Yeah.
It might have been a little worded differently, but just speaking to that, just how strange it can be to when you actually think about, that if you don't have your own body parts that you were born with, that you have someone else's, it's really, when you put it just so starkly like that in his mind, how he thinks about it, I thought it was really powerful.
Yeah. Oops, let's see. There we go. This is Daniel Layton. He has Crohn's disease, and his work is very literal, as you can see. And I honestly cannot remember the full story of this, but I believe it has to do when he was young and was having really, really bad problems. And what I like about his work, other than how literal it is his color choices. And he uses a lot of this orange, which to me just looks so much like stomach acid. And we've discussed that, whether that was his choice, but they're very acidy colors. I mean, you really get the sense of what he must be going through. And do you want to talk about the faculty member and her daughter that came in during that talk?
When he had his work in the gallery and we had a conversation, one of the staff members at Keck came in and brought her daughter, who had a relatively new diagnosis of Crohn's disease, and she knew this art exhibit was coming, and she wanted to have the experience of hearing the artist talk. And so I think the young girl asked a question that was terrific and got a wonderful answer. So it was really sort of meaningful to her and to the artist, and really that was the first time I began to feel the change in our community as a result of this gallery and the work we do. That now this is a space where at lunch faculty and staff and students can come together and just experience our worlds differently than in our own little cubicles somewhere.
This one is by Ellen Canter, and we showed her, and NPR did a story on this show, and they asked the doctor about this photo that Ellen had done. And Ellen does a lot of work. She was having migraines and bad back pain at the time, and I don't think she totally understood everything the doctors were telling her, and she did work about all the things the doctors were saying that were not specifically clear. She would go to the doctor, she'd listen to what they'd say, and then she'd go home and say, and the works are titled like, they say I have this, they say I have that. And so she was obviously, you can look at this piece and it's so obvious, back pain, head pain. So they talked to a doctor about it, and his only comment was, well, proportionally it's incorrect. That was his only comment about this incredibly powerful piece about pain. And I think that is what Dr. Schaff and I are fighting against here. So I love that piece. This is J. Frederick May, and you can explain his illness, but he had a stroke. He can only see out of one side, and his brain sort of makes up what he's not seeing out of the other eye or side of his brain. And he's started doing these photo I'm not even sure if they're collages or what, to sort of let us know what his vision is like.
Yeah, my favorite part of that show when he exhibited his work, and there was another artist as well who had a neurological condition, and the department chair here at USC in neurology, Dr. Chu, was invited to be in conversation with them, and the students were studying neurology in their first year course, and Dr. Chu is very personable, and she was chatting, and she said, "Well, wait a minute, to J. Frederick, she said, do you mind if I examine you?" And so he said, no problem. So she proceeded to do a visual field examination and show the students and sort of quiz them in that moment, which is not how we imagined this going, but it worked, and it was very, I think it was educational, and then again, just this sort of different spirit of how these things, it's not usually where you do an exam, right? So it's good.
All right. This is Elizabeth Jameson, who was here, who was an amazing show. She has MS. She is kind of late stage in it. She can really only move from the neck down now. She came down from San Francisco with an assistant, and she is still doing work, although her work now requires her to work in tandem with someone else. So this is one of her brain scans, and she has an assistant who adds the color, and she tells her what to do. And other than just being an amazing woman who has written for the New York Times and gives lectures all over the place, she started out with sort of a message to all the med students about how important their work was. And I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, no, she's just so incredibly generous. So her part of her meaning making and with this work with us was, to sort of express her gratitude to them as future physicians, and kind of gratitude for the work that they would be doing, and her appreciation of how difficult it can be. And I think the students were very moved by that, in addition to being moved by her work and her story.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, also, all these artists we're talking about, the talks with them are on the HEAL website.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to go back and look closer at any of these people and what they had to say rather than what I have to say.
I was just going to say, I love that you've included this one and that you mentioned that she has to do it with her assistant or with her caregiver, because that's such a huge factor of illness, is that oftentimes it's really forced community. And that's, there's a lot to that with, you have to collaborate with others, whether it's your doctor or your caregivers or your family. So I like that it's.
And you have
included
that too. You work with people who help you, especially
Yes.
your resin work and.
Yes, and plexi work and.
Yeah. This is Dylan Mortimer, and he also has cystic fibrosis and has had 2 lung transplants, and his work is amazing to me because it's sort of like a party. It's glitter. It's
Sort of.
It is.
It is a party.
So he does a lot of work with trees. So sort of the opposite of lungs dying, he does trees growing, which is why this is a lung image, but it's turned upside down. So he's painted dying trees as part of outdoor work, pinks, to remind people to give their lungs if they die. He tries to bring awareness to transplants. But everything he does is glitter, and he does a lot of work. He has one set that I love, which was the back of different ambulances. Like, I had never noticed that every ambulance has a different pattern on the back. So he did this whole series of, if you're about to be put in an ambulance to go to the hospital, what do you see? You see all these different crazy patterns on the back of them. I don't know if you have anything to add?
I remember everyone talking about the glitter in that show. It was just very bright and joyful to look at.
It's part of, and he does like gigantic pieces. These tree series, like entire walls in hospitals. He does a lot of site-specific work for hospitals.
And isn't that so funny? Everyone expects work about illness to be,
Yeah.
drab and uncolorful, and
Right.
actually it's pretty colorful.
Right.
Yeah. So this is Alice. Okay, so that first batch of work was people sort of talking about their experience. So now we're getting to work by people who are doing work because they are around other people who are sick. So this is Alice Marie Perrault, and her son has cerebral palsy. And this is one of the dolls that they were given in the hospital to sort of, I'm trying to remember exactly how this was done, but they were given the doll in the hospital to sort of, I don't want to say normalize him. What's the correct term? I'm not a doctor.
I might have been to do with play therapy or some way in which they were sort of helping him.
It's a Buddy doll. So it's called, the piece is called Buddy. So she works on these dolls, and she does a lot of work, much like Susan. She uses all the supplies that come for her son. And she has, I don't know how big your supply area is. She actually has an entire 2-car garage in her house full of medical supplies. Is yours that bad?
Not quite that big.
So, and she's done some amazing installation work, like huge pieces using tubing and things like that. So, and also her work, also very happy, and most of it very colorful, very happy. The one thing about both you guys, like you do your pill work and you do the bottles. Medical supplies, I guess so people don't mix them up. The pills are all great colors. Mm-hmm. They're different shapes. The labels are all, I guess so that you can just look at things and go, that's not that pill, that's this pill. But it is amazing like how colorful all the medical supplies are, and they really lend themselves to doing great work. This is Wing San Sit, and she actually photographed you, Susan, and she had cancer and then realized how it changed her mobility and started doing work with other people about how their illnesses affected their mobility. So why don't you talk about this piece, and she's not here, what's going on?
So she photographed me putting my pills in my pill boxes. And I had a small light on my finger, and she did a slow motion photograph, and you can see my finger going, dropping the pills in the pill box. And again, as you were talking about colors, all the pill boxes are these bright colors, and it's not that it's a happy thing. It's something that's very time-consuming, and one definitely doesn't look forward to doing it. But she captured this image, and it really expresses the actual implementation of putting the pills in the box, which you can kind of see, and the pill bottles lined up on the side. And as Ted was saying, all the pill bottles are different, the pills are all different, and she captured the reflection as well of the images of the light on the table bouncing, which I think is pretty beautiful.
Yeah, so her whole series used those little diodes on people's hands and feet to show their movement. She used a lot of time exposures.
Did you meet through TED?
Yes.
I'm like a human Rolodex.
That's amazing.
Of sick people.
Totally amazing.
And this is, we're going to end with a piece of mine. So I was very sick for years and did work about myself. And then when new treatments came about, I still wanted to tell stories of mobility and health. So I started doing work about other people. And I decided scars were the best way to do this. So this is a woman who had a double mastectomy. And so I do prints of them, and I have them write their own narratives. And has turned into a really great way to have other people tell their stories about what they've gone through, depending on what type of scar, whether it was an accident or cancer or transplant or whatever. Because there was, I don't know, how are we doing time-wise before I...
Maybe like 3 more minutes and then we'll take questions.
So there's a certain, there's a couple things I bring up with each of the artists that are here. One is, if you guys were healthy, you wouldn't have done any of the work that we've ever shown here.
Not at all.
No.
And that's one of the things I like to say. If I had been healthy, I never would have done this scar work. And I've done hundreds of these prints now. You wouldn't have done these, you would have done other work, but you would have done performance art, but it would have been different, other photographs. You were in design and art before. So, my main point as we're talking to all the new med students is being sick, it's not it can be a death knell, but in a lot of times it's just sending you on a different track, and people adapt and you get used to your illness and you still try to have the best life you can, and that includes making art. And if people were making art about landscapes before because they were happy and they did landscapes, well, maybe now they're thinking about their illnesses. And you guys can talk to this, being sick takes up a lot of space in your brain. So it makes sense that you would start internalizing it and making art. And it's not like a self-centered thing. It's just being sick takes a lot of energy.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard many people with chronic illnesses say it's akin to a third-time job, or an additional full-time job. And especially in cancer, you get hit with, you want to be, you're so lucky, you survived, count your blessings, doors closed, windows open, all that, kind of like garbage cliches. But I think there's Krista Tippett had a quote that was, the things that go wrong for you have a lot of potential to become your gift to the world. And I think that's exactly what you're talking to. I mean, none of this, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have created any of this art without, having gone through cancer,
I just want to add that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet Ted, to meet Siobhan, Pam. I mean, I just wouldn't have had these opportunities, which have completely, honestly, changed my life for the better. And while I wouldn't wish that, I had MS, it's really made a huge difference in my life and who I am as a person.
All right. Would you like to wrap up? Any final thoughts about having art in your medical school?
Well, I just think, one of the other things that we talk about in the work we do in the arts and humanities and medical education is just the power of creativity. I think that it's very easy for a scientifically founded profession as ours to forget that science itself is a creative act. The work that we do in relationships with our patients, the discoveries we make, the things we learn as humans as we care for others, the ways in which we express ourselves as health professionals, or how we sort of process and think about what we do. I think, I'm inspired. My creative sort of self gets inspired by this work, and I feel like I'm going to do a better job. I've often felt, coming away from conversations like this, that I approach patient care differently. I approach teaching differently because I've just seen the world a little bit differently, thanks to the work of the artists who share their work with us. And so I just want to express my gratitude to you for making it happen, to you for being part of it, and to all of our artists, past, present, and future.
All right. Well, thank you guys for helping us today.
Absolutely.
We'd love to hear any questions that you have.
Including us.
They're not shy. So.
I guess we were so thorough
Just give them a minute. They might be
Ask
thinking.
away.
Yes.
Just wondering, when you were first getting acquainted with your respective conditions, did anybody ever introduce you to the idea of like an artist community or kind of seeking support in art, or this was just something that you came to on your own?
For myself, I actually sought it out very aggressively because I was fortunate enough that my diagnosis is not immediate, at least. So I do have a fairly decent survival rate, apparently, as of right now. So I had the luxury to really like explore what cancer meant, what my illness was going to mean, and how it was going to change my life. But so many people don't have that luxury, I think, and can only focus on the actual, the actualities of the illness, and just survival is enough. I was lucky enough to not be in that position, and so I really looked for other artists who were sick or other people who were sick and making art about that experience, and that's actually how I found Ted, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
And I think with any sort of art, you get groups of people that do landscapes, and you get people who paint birds, and we found, I joined a group I think you had started, Patient Experience.
Yeah.
And it was all artists I found them on Facebook, I think, and
Yeah.
Dominic is also in that group.
Mm-hmm. It was out of a need to have an alternative conversation about what the illness was, I think, or for me at least. Yeah.
And for me, nobody ever mentioned it. It just was, I guess, intuitive. I just from the background that I had, I could just kind of like what you were saying, I could just see all these elements from my treatment start to become something. And I had to wait and think it through until I had the time to really develop it into something. But it came from within.
One thing that, and I've talked about it in different shows before, is when writers, if Kerouac or somebody, Steinbeck writes about people's misery, Dust Bowl, everyone goes, oh, they are so insightful, they are so great. But if we paint a colonoscopy or brain cancer, everyone's like, I don't want to see that. So there are lots and lots of artists doing work about their illness around, but galleries tend to not want to show it. So it builds up in our houses, and that's one thing great about this gallery is that it gives wall space to people who a lot of times would never get wall space.
Well, and there is a deep history of artists who have been sick or people who are sick and have made art about that. And there's a lot to learn and a lot of education that healthcare providers and patients themselves can glean from that. I think we just don't. It's hard to find.
Yeah, unless it's Frida Kahlo.
Right.
Everyone knows Frida
Everyone
Kahlo.
knows Frida.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
I'm curious if you were an artist before your illness, and if so, did your art change because of your illness?
Me personally, actually I was an interior designer. I had a background in design and art, but I honestly hadn't done any real art. I had been designing interiors for offices and homes. And so the art came out of my illness. And I feel blessed and grateful that it came and that you guys provide a place where we can show it and it can be appreciated and seen.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my art came first. I went to school for art and art history, and that's fully what I intended to do with my life. I was planning on going, the academic art history route, but not actually making any work anymore. And that's when I got diagnosed, and life took a really drastic turn towards something else. But art kind of came roaring back, almost literally from the first time I was admitted to the hospital. So the art came first, but the illness is really what kept it going, I'd have to say. Yeah.
In my case, I did work about being sick when I was younger, and then when these new treatments came up, all of a sudden I didn't know what to paint anymore. I didn't know what to draw because everything I had just drawn and painted like this misery I had, and then all of a sudden it was gone. And so that's when I decided I'm going to tell other people's stories. So I'm sort of the opposite. So.
Well, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.